Hello and welcome to the 12th episode of The Prop House, a special Beetlejuice themed episode where we make a prop from both the Broadway show and from the movie. So, let's get started. Now the first project, as shown here, is a microphone that turns into a knife. So it when it's right side up, it looks like a microphone, but when you flip it over, a knife comes out and then he kind of chases after people. I know this photo is kind of hard to see what's happening, but it's the best photo I could get. It's a pretty simple project, or idea at least. It's a PVC pipe, some 3D printed parts, some wire, and some foam. That's actually it. And I actually modeled one of my first decent model pieces for this project. So this project is split up into 5 pieces. You have the microphone, the PVC pipe, the 2 caps that are 3D printed. One has a sleeve to it, and then you have the knife. Now, to explain how this works is, think of the lightsabers you get at Disney or at like Walmart, the toy ones that are like a telescope, where you fling it and they friction fit together and lock in place. That's kind of what we're doing here. So right here you see me in the 3D modeling program. Now, what I'm doing is I'm making 2 cylinders to make a cap for the PVC pipe. This is the side that the microphone will go on, but for the other side, I do the same thing. I just stick the knife sleeve on top of it, and then I put the blade inside the sleeve in the program, and then I use something called a subtract tool to cut out the space where the knife comes out, and that creates kind of that friction fit like I was talking about, like how a lightsaber has, all in one piece that goes inside the PVC pipe. And this footage is sped up by 250% just to give you an idea of how fast it's going. Now up next is 3D printing. So there isn't much to talk about here, and it's not a very long video, but what I wanted to talk about is how many times you have to reprint with 3D printing. So my first 2 or 3 caps were not sized correctly. Turns out my PVC pipe was not perfectly round on the inside. Didn't realize that till after 2 tries or 3 tries, I can't remember exactly. So that took 2 tries. And then I think I printed like 4 blades in the end, all at different inside strength, if that makes any sense. So the infill, which is 3D printed parts, are usually not solid. So they're usually only about 20% solid. It's probably your average 3D print. I printed it at 10% at first because I didn't think it needed to be that solid. I wanted it to be lightweight so it could easily be friction fit, but I ended up having to up that to either 15 or 20% in the end because they would snap as I was trying to sand them down. The knife I ended up with snapped, but I ended up just using a soldering iron to weld the plastic back together because at that point I was on my 4th knife and I was over it, which is something that happens, you know, with 3D printing. It can get frustrating, but I think it looked pretty good at the end. So just a little fun fact about sometimes 3D printing is not click it and it goes. So it was time to test fit the 3D prints, so I did so. They fit very well. I did end up gluing them together after I painted the PVC pipe because I felt that they would wear down eventually and fall out. So I wanted to make the PVC pipe part black and leave the caps gray for a bit of added detail. I was afraid if I did it all black that it would kind of blend together and it make it look kind of if that makes any sense. So I wanted to add as much detail as possible with such a simple piece. So I sanded the PVC pipe down and then I just sprayed it with some black spray paint I had laying around. Now, I wanted to show you this footage because, well, I thought it was kind of interesting, but I was able to use the first caps that I printed that ended up being too small or too big to test the size of hole I needed to drill for the metal wire that was used for the microphone part. So, you know, it didn't end up being a waste. I was able to use it in some way, shape, or form. So up next was microphone. So I start off by drilling in the actual cap, sticking a wire through it. I bent the wire around back into the cap, and then I bent it against the cap and glued it so it was really secure. And then it was time for the microphone foam part. Now I thought about doing a small little microphone thing, like just use an actual one I had laying around, but I decided I ended up wanting to make it really big and cartoony. I know this doesn't look exactly like the real one. The more I was kind of working off memory here, honestly. There's not a lot of photos of this floating around. So I worked off memory, and I kind of wanted to take it my own way. So I wanted to make the microphone part, the foam part, big and cartoony and over the top. So I cut a piece of, I don't even know how thick it is. It's a pretty thick foam. And then I started rounding it out with some shears. And then from there, I just spray painted it, stuck it on the metal, and then I glued it at the end so that way it won't fall off. So I just wanted to show you how I attach the knife back together. So I just used a soldering iron, melted the plastic back together, and it's pretty strong. I've kind of stress tested it, and it's holding up pretty well. And then I sanded at the knife for a while to make it as smooth as possible, and to make the whole knife smaller as possible, just so it can extend as far as possible. And then, once you stick it all together, you end up with a little something like this. Now, honestly, it sounded kind of bad with the plastic rubbing on plastic, but if you add a little sound effect to it, it makes it way better. It's amazing how sound can make all the difference. Well, I'm super happy with how this has come out so far, and I think we're having a great start to this episode. I love how the blade works. It works so well. And it was a really fun mix of 3D printing and stuff I already had around, and a bit of a challenge for myself. So I think that's a good start. So let's move on to the next Beetlejuice prop. Let's just move on. So the next prop is the classic Beetlejuice sign that is shown off in the movie. It is different than the one on Broadway. I wanted to have both a movie prop and a Broadway prop for this episode, so this is the one that represents the movie. So I started off by flipping this palette I had laying around over, and I got out a reference photo and just started using a yardstick and a Sharpie to mark out the lines for the sign. And something important to know is that a big part of Beetlejuice is nothing is straight and normal. So the fact that it's a little lopsided and weird can kind of play into the fact. So your mess ups can turn into a feature. So then I just used the handy dandy jigsaw to cut it out. Well, now during the editing process, I realized I've lost the footage of priming, but I'll explain it to you. I just used some normal white primer as the first two coats. The first coat gets soaked in a lot, so that's your first one. It kind of goes to waste, but the more you soak in at first, the less it soaks in later, at least in my experience. So I did 2 coats of it before I did the first color coat. Now, you may notice the first color coat is orange, and the sign is actually yellow. This is 2 reasons why. Number 1, I had it wrong in my head. Number 2, I messed up. So there's that, I guess. Luckily, eventually my sister was like, "Isn't that supposed to be yellow?" And then I looked it up and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's supposed to be yellow." And she helped me mix some paint together to make it more yellow. It could have definitely been more yellow in the end, but that's a bit of the mess up. I kind of was ready to get it done and was over it at that point, so we made it more yellow. It's definitely more yellow in the end. And I feel even that looking at this footage, it's more orange on the footage than it was in real life, but that could just me hoping it is that. And the arrows are red, so that is 3 coats of red, 2 coats of orange, 1 coat of yellow, 2 coats of primer, ending in 8 coats in total, if my math is correct. Not totally sure. But 8 coats in the end, so not too bad, I guess. So at this point, I asked my sister to help painting the name on it. I didn't feel confident in it at all. I just didn't feel comfortable painting it, so I asked for help. And she did a great job in the end. We were kind of going for like a washed out look, kind of. You can't really tell on the camera, but the yellow kind of has this like rough look to it in person that's kind of old. So that was kind of the idea. Like it's been sitting in the underworld forever. So it's kind of hard to tell on camera. You don't see the detail on the yellow as much, but you can see it in person. She did great with the writing, as well as the 3 lines, for one above the first time, in the middle, and then at the bottom. And I could not be happier with how the writing came out. So thank you, Holly. So the next step was cutting holes, or drilling out the holes for the lights to go in. I just used a bit that was a circular bit for this. I tried using a smaller drill bit, like just a normal cylinder one, and I could not make a bigger hole. I used a piece of test wood for it. So the holes are definitely a little too big. They're too big for what I need, but there was not a way I could think of to make them a smaller hole without going and buying a new drill bit, which just didn't want to do. So they're a bit bigger than I wanted, but they came out pretty well. I think it still looks pretty good. And only one had tear out on the top of it, which we just tried to match the coat of yellow and painted around it, cleaned it up. And then one by one, I just installed all 20 bulbs, basically like a sandwich almost, where the bulb is the bread, the socket is the bread, and the sign is kind of the meat of the sandwich you go through, and it locks the bulbs in place. Now, something I forgot to record is the way I get the lights flashing is it's a Christmas light show box. You plug your lights into it and you choose the mode, and it will flash and dim, or strobe, or kind of like a breathe where it goes in and out slowly. And I use that to get the flashing you see later to kind of like to draw your attention, like you would see a big road sign, kind of like the Beetlejuice sign. Well, I'm super happy with how the stuff came out in the end. Both the sign and the mic. I do think the sign looks a little flat, a bit more flat than I wanted it to, but give and take. Thank you for watching this special Beetlejuice episode. Oh boy. Huh.